Welcome to the IpX True North podcast, where we connect people, processes, and tools.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brandy Taylor, and I'm the VP of Services for IpX. And I am one lucky duck today. I am getting to hang out with the very famous Ken Black and Ray Wozny. At least you guys are very famous in my world. And you are very loved and very just everyone's very fond of you guys in the industry and in the realm of what we do. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. By the way, we're kind of famous in our own world too. So
you guys are kind of a big deal. So today I think our title is Ray and Ken's CM Words of Wisdom. So I'm pretty excited about that because I'm really looking forward to learning something from you guys today. I expect that there's going to be a number of things that we kind of go through and people will learn about you guys, things that maybe little tidbits of fun that they hadn't learned about you guys in the past. So no pressure there, but find me a tidbit. All right. Well, I guess the first question, let's just kind of get this conversation rolling. And the first question that we have for you guys is, how many years have you been involved with configuration management?
Are you allowed to ask that kind of a question?
I don't know. You tell me.
Okay. Let me think a second. Ken, do you know the answer to yours?
So formally or informally, informally, I've been involved in configuration management my whole life that I can remember. Yeah, because people probably don't realize every single day of your life, you are in some regard, some way involved in configuration management. You're following a recipe to make a meal. The recipe is broken up into sections, right? It's got a list of ingredients like a bill of materials. It's got a set of instructions like a process plan. So that's CM. But you also encounter, at least I know I have, encountered CM problems. Classic. I have a pretty extensive movie collection, and I ordered a movie. It's been quite a while now, a couple of years ago. It arrived. I took it out of the envelope. The package was exactly what I had ordered. It was perfect. I opened up the case and took out the CD, and it was perfect. Had the picture of the movie star that was in the film. I put the disc into the player, and it was a completely different movie.
Wow.
So I explained that. I told that to one of my classes, and somebody said, well, that's not a CM problem. That's a labeling problem. And I had a friend, his birthday was coming up, and his wife was going to make him a cake. He loved the Devil's Food chocolate. So she went to the store and bought one of the name brand Devil Foods chocolate, took it home, opened the package. It was lemon.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm sure a lot of you have encountered some kind of issues like that throughout your life. Those are CM problems. So when I say I've been involved with CM, my whole life, that's what I'm talking about. Formally, when did I get started in CM? It was probably around early 1980s. That's probably when formally I was involved in CM. Prior to that, though, I've been working in a lot of different areas, all of them either impacted by or involved in configuration management. So it's hard to pinpoint a specific point. How about you, Ray?
My professional job, first job in CM was in 1982 at IBM. So I would say ever since then, I've been working in configuration management, teaching it, living the heartaches of it. But so, yeah, over 40 years. So long time.
That's a long
Seen
time.
it all.
Yeah, you're getting old.
Yeah, well, I started when I was 6. So we hired young back then. So
yeah, you beat me by 2 years.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, for one, I always love to find out like how people got engaged in this in the first place, right? Like, this is not something we went to school for. You don't grow up saying, I want to be this. So tell me how you got engaged.
Well, so mine starts off is when I got out of school and I was looking for something to do. And my dad worked at IBM. So he said, come work at IBM. And with my experience, I got a job working in receiving inspection. And so I loved it. I had couple guys that worked there with me. We became really close friends in a year. I'd been there for about a couple years. And then my boss called me in and said, hey, Ray, there's an opportunity for you. I said, really? What is it? And he goes, there's an opening in dock control. And I said, that sounds like boring stuff. Thanks, but no thanks. And so he says, okay, So about a month later, he called me back in and he said, hey, that opening's still there, right? I go, what opening? He goes, document control. And I said, oh, well, no thanks. And 3 weeks later, he calls me and he goes, hey, you know that opening is still there? You know, that pays, I'll give you a percentage, 12% more than what you're making now. And I looked at him and I said, well, document control sounds like a terrific job. 12%, I'm going to be rich. And so that was my introduction. And I became what was called a PDA, product documentation analyst. And so mine was just because I had a boss at the time who was persistent, and he saw something in me, and he told me, he goes, there will always be documentation. He goes, yes, receiving inspection is important and stuff like that, but where the world's going and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, Ray, there'll always be documentation. If you go over there and you like it, you'll have a job for life. And so Jerry Shaughnessy was his name. So that was my first introduction and my savior into the world of, I guess some people would say, unfortunate savior of configuration management. And it was about a year later when IBM actually changed the name Doc Control to configuration management. So that was my introduction to it. And then shortly after that, I left IBM, went to a company called Storage Tech. And the second position I had, again, was in configuration management. And I had a manager who told me, hey, you're doing a great job, been about a year and a half, and I want to make you the supervisor. But to become a supervisor, you have to take this training on configuration management. And I said, and I had little kids at the time, I said, no, I'm not interested in taking the training. And she goes, no, I think you need to take the training. I just took it. It's great training. Carol Fitzsimmons was her name. She goes, you need to take the training. I was like really pushing back. She goes, it's in San Diego in December, January, February. And of course, in Colorado, I said, well, of course I have to take this training. That was my introduction. And that's when I first met Vince and Ken. Ken was my instructor. And Vince was my instructor as well. And that's when I was introduced to CM2, right, which was the birth of a whole new career for me. So, which was wonderful. So that was my introduction.
So mine, I went straight from high school into the military. So I was in the Air Force for 4 years, and I was actually in the operation maintenance phase of the product lifecycle because the things that we were utilizing, of course, were in the field. They'd been deployed. So without knowing it, I was learning the fallout of not having good configuration management processes and protocols in place because we were struggling out there trying to keep all of our equipment maintained and operable. So after the 4 years of Air Force time, I was looking around and I found a job at an aerospace company that was doing both commercial and defense contractor work. And they hired me. What was my job title? I was a tool scheduler. That was my job. And what my job was then was whenever they would process engineering changes that required tools to be reworked, it was my job to scour the campus to locate the tools that needed to be reworked and work with manufacturing to be able to have them ramp up their build process to get some stock so I could pull the tools out and send them into the shop to get them reworked up the new configuration to support the implementation plan changes. That was my first exposure to that piece of CM. And I did that for a while. Then I had many different positions within that company over the years. But we were always struggling. We were struggling with quality issues. We were struggling to meet schedule. It never failed. Every time we would launch a new program, we would stumble, and it was really messy. So I started looking around and I started doing some things and putting some things together, not knowing that what I was doing was configuration management. And eventually, I think at the time I was the manager in contracts, and I finally went to the senior leadership of the company. I said, I think our problem is we don't have a formal configuration management group. And nobody really knew what that meant. But I kept saying that over and over again. And so, they say, if you don't want the assignment, don't say anything. Well, I kept saying it, and they anointed me as the first configuration management manager in the company. And that's where it all really formally got started. And here we are, a lot of years later.
So much time has passed since then. Tell me a little bit more about your journeys. Where did you go? Was this kind of an intentional thing for each of you as you progressed through your careers? Or was it just something that kind of happened to you guys?
I think you said it at the beginning. I'd never met anybody that when they first started thinking about their future said, I'm going to be a CMer. That's what I'm going to do. I've never heard anybody say that. I've never heard anybody that said CM is the career path that I want to follow. People fall into it. Like Ray, document control. No, I don't want to do that. That sounds boring. But he fell into it. Me, tool scheduling. Well, tool scheduling was kind of cool because I got free reign of the campus. I was on my own. I could walk anywhere I wanted, do whatever I wanted. But then when they offered me another position, just like they did with Ray, I'm thinking, I got all this great freedom out here. I'm outside. Now, remember, I'm in San Diego, so being outside is kind of cool. And finally, the pressures come to bear where they took me out of that really fun, always walking around outside, and put me into an office environment and put me in charge of a team. And by the way, the first supervisory role that I had was a group that was responsible for taking engineering changes that were being processed, evaluating all the part numbers that were being changed in the change, and then going out into the stock room or out into the floor stock or with work in process. And we had to make sure that all of the parts needed to reach the effectivity of the change were available. And any parts that were excess to the effectivity were properly dispositioned. That was my first supervisory role. So I stayed with that company for a long time, over 20 years. And then I had an opportunity that was presented that, it's one of those stories that we're going to make you an opportunity you just can't turn down. And I actually joined ICM, which was the predecessor of IpX. And I joined them full-time in like 1992, I want to say. Vince was a guy, and he'd been pursuing me for quite a while, but I kept fighting him. Remember, I'm in San Diego. Vince was in Phoenix, Arizona, and he said, great opportunity, great job, great salary, but you got to move to Phoenix. And I'm thinking, San Diego, Phoenix, no. And so I kept saying no until finally he decided that I could join ICM and still live in San Diego. So I did that until 98. And I got another one of those opportunities you just can't refuse. And I went to work for Michael Dell on his executive staff in Austin, Texas. And I was there for 2 years. And, I don't want to say anything negative about any organization or any company, but when you're in the realm of an organization that is very cliquish and it's difficult to get things done, I just reached a level of frustration because I couldn't get the organization to move the direction I knew that it needed to move. And so I resigned. I called Vince the day I resigned, and he asked me when I could start. And so I ended up going back to ICM, which then transitioned to IpX, and here we are.
Okay. Well, my journey wasn't that much different. Found out very quickly after I became a PDA and left IBM to go to a company called Storage Tech that dealing with all of the documentation, working with the engineers was actually kind of interesting and fun because, yes, some engineers are super geeky and, others are super friendly. But, I made friends with a lot of engineers, and I realized that what we were doing and what I was doing, my specific job at the time, was actually helping them avoid mistakes, right? And so we were doing, back then, there was a lot of paper, right? And so we were doing bomb checks against drawings and these type of things and everything else. And I was, for whatever reason, maybe my electrical background, whatever, I just had good attention to detail. And so I was able to thrive there. And of course, going back to my manager at the time, Carol Fitzsimmons, she convinced me to go through the Dale Carnegie courses and all this other training. And before we knew it, she moved up. And then I took over the CM department and became a manager. And then from there, I moved up the chain of management to where I was a director at Storage Tech. Then I left to go to another company called Quantum, where I became a senior director and had all of, which was really kind of cool because in both director positions, I had what used to be called the Master File Center. I had the ECAD and the MCAD folks reporting to me. I had configuration management. I had tech pubs. I had all these departments. And so I got all this knowledge, and a lot of it was just from dealing with the problems that all these departments were having. And I was able to go in with configuration management with that basis, that knowledge I learned from Ken and Vince and stuff like that, and come up with solutions that were acceptable at the time and stuff like that. And not to say that there weren't battles and fights over when to change a part number and all those other things, which I know we're going to get into and stuff like that. But it was an interesting journey. And the same thing, Vince, ICM at the time had a conference every year. I attended the conference every year. They were great conferences, continue to be great conferences. And Vince asked me if I'd go to work for him. And again, I said, no, I can't travel. I have kids. I have a great job. And at that time, I was at Quantum. I'm a senior director. I have a great living. And there was a conference in Denver. And I went to the conference, and we went to lunch, and he says, come work for us. Here's what you do. You'll be working with all these different companies. And this was in 2001. And so that's when I left the corporate world to go over to ICM to learn to be a trainer, because again, that's a whole different learning experience, right? Taking that knowledge and experience and putting it to learning. And that's what I've been doing. And I tell everybody that I meet, I tell all my classes, I believe I probably have one of the best jobs in the world, because I get to go around doing something that I love with different companies, different people, get to help a lot of them. Some companies don't want to help. They just send their people. But we still get to go out there and have those experiences. And 5 years later, 10 years later, get to hear stories about people who took that knowledge and were able to actually succeed and do some great things in their companies. I feel I've been blessed, and I'm so fortunate. And I've made great friends along the way at all these different companies around the world. Friends with my best buddy there, Ken, who taught me this stuff right from at the very beginning and stuff like that. So it's been a great career.
Absolutely agree. I look around and I think, holy smokes, there's less than a handful of people in the world that do what Ray and I do. So it's truly remarkable. And I feel the same way. I mean, I feel blessed. To me, it's not work. It's like a hobby. And I got to tell you, this stuff is like a virus. It gets into you and you can't shake it. You can't get rid of it. It spreads and just grows inside to the point where I think CM every single day. If I'm at a business of some kind, not for ICM, if I'm just out shopping or at a restaurant or wherever, and I see things going on, I'm always looking at their processes. There's the problem with that process right there. I can't shake it. It's part of me. That's just what I do. And now my wife does the same thing. She'll see something else. She go, oh boy, they got a process problem. I go, oh, you are so indoctrinated.
Very cool. And, I think it's kind of funny, the way that like different people fall into this. And like you said, it does. It's like a virus and it grows and you become this. I always call it like a hub of knowledge. You're this liaison between so many far corners of a business, and you kind of know a little bit of what's going on everywhere. And that experience is so valuable. And so it doesn't surprise me that once you kind of get in that mode, you're kind of stuck there, right? And you kind of have that knowledge and you want to help fix things. So it's kind of just, it takes a certain person to fall into that and then to continue to carry that on. And they got to have passion like both of you guys have.
Oh, good word. Yeah. Passion. Got you. Two things, passion and tenacity. If you've got those two things, there's not much you can't do.
Right.
I agree. All right. Well, throughout all of the training and all of the courseware and all of the years, I've heard so many really, really great stories from both of you guys that have resonated with me. I guess one of the things that I think would be very interesting to learn is talk to me about what was the most interesting CM problem that you have encountered, or a very interesting one that, maybe doesn't always come up in our courseware.
Ken, you want to go first? Yeah. Just one? Only one?
Yeah.
Or it could be one of the most challenging ones. Maybe it's most interesting or the most challenging. If there's something that was just really a big, hairy one, what I would call it.
I don't know. I won't give you a big, hairy one, but I'll give you a personal experience that I had. I bought new 2016 Ford Explorer.
Okay.
And And I still have it. I love that vehicle. So it was like a week after I'd purchased it. I just happened to pull up to a stoplight, and the vehicle right in front of me was the twin sister of my Explorer. Same make, same model, same year, same color, everything exactly the same, but something wasn't. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I'm looking at the back of this vehicle, and I'm thinking there's something is different. And then as they pulled away and I went to wherever I was going to a store, got to the place, I got out and walked around behind my car or behind my Explorer just to look. And then it struck me that year of Explorer has like a 6-inch rain and sun deflector. It's like a little shade that extends out over the top of the rear window. I didn't have it. It was a sub-assembly that was not installed on the vehicle. So off I go, man. I'm going to the dealer. Now, I've been dealing with this dealership for many, many years. I bought several cars from them. So I go in, sales guy comes out. What can I do for you? And I said, well, I got a little issue here. And I told him the story and I showed him. And he went, oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. We're going to have to order that for you. Now, remember, I only had the vehicle for about a week. He said, we're going to have to order that for you. I said, oh, okay. How long will that take? Probably 6 months. And I'm going, I don't think so, Tim. So he said, well, you have to understand. And I said, no, look, there's another one just like mine sitting right over there on the lot. You can take that off of that vehicle, put it onto mine, and order a replacement for that one. And you're going to love this. See, people have to be careful when they act like they know something that they don't think anybody else knows. This guy says, well, sir, let me explain. That part happens to be a serial number controlled assembly that is assigned to your vehicle at the factory. So we can't swap that out. We have to go through the normal pipelines so that the factory can reassign that sub-assembly serial number to your car. And I went, we're done. You and I aren't talking anymore. I went in to see the manager, told him what was going on. And when I told him about our conversation with the sales guy, he actually laughed about it. And I said, well, that's kind of funny for me too, because I know how much baloney that was. But, for somebody that didn't know, he would have snowballed him. He would have been convinced. So about 30 minutes later, I drove off the lot with the deflector on my car. You have to wonder, for a configuration manager, what's it got to do with CM? Well, here's my question. How did that vehicle pass conformance inspection? Mm-hmm. The whole sub-assembly was missing off the back of that vehicle. And yet, it passed final inspection. So talk about process issues or process gaps. There's one.
I think the dealer took yours off for somebody else who was missing. It was snowball thing. It just kept going on for months. Yeah. I would say one of the, I guess if you want to call it, because in my classes, I always tell stories about my customers, and sometimes I can mention names because they allow me, but sometimes I can't. But I had a customer who I've actually been working with for many, many years, probably over 13, 14 years doing training for them. Big company in California. And ever since I started there, we would always have this discussion in our training about revisions, right? And what their process was is in development, they had numerical revs. And then when they went to production, they would switch everything to alpha rev. And from day one, I would sit there and say, why do you do that? Well, that's the factory and everybody knows that it's in production now. And every time we'd have all these conversations, and I trained probably 25 managers there. And I would always tell them that that's such a bad practice. Think of all the hours, the thousands of hours that an engineer is just spending taking something to alpha rev instead of just going with whatever rev it is. If you start off with alpha, you go to numeric, and changing the life cycle state can control that. And the message always to me was, well, you don't understand. It's difficult to change process. And this went on for years and years and years. And they're a very secretive company. And then one year I was there and I was doing training, and it was the second week of training, course 3 and 4. And we started talking about revisions. And I said, and I know that you guys, go from numerical rev to alpha revs. And somebody raised their hand and said, we don't do that on my program. And I stopped and I said, what?
Whoa.
No, we haven't done that on our new program. And then somebody else said, yeah, we stopped doing that about a year ago. And I was like, oh, the sky opened up, right? But literally, it probably took 10 years of discussions. And I know things don't always move fast in corporations and stuff like that, especially large ones and everything else. But just to hear that, right? And they would never admit to me that it was from them going through the training and hearing the stories. But somebody must have, because I would always tell them, you know, have a Kaizen on it, right? Go do a study on how many hours you guys are wasting. And by the way, go ask your suppliers if they'll still build parts with you that you're going to pay them for. If they get a drawing from you and the first time they see it, it's at a revision 21 or revision F. And they go, no, I don't want your money. They're going to build with what you tell them the requirements are by type, number, and rev. And so that's a story that'll always stay with me, because for years, and it was just so frustrating to hear them just go on. And then one day, just magically, things got better. So,
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Magic.
The magic of common sense.
Magic of common sense. I love that.
If only it was common.
Yeah.
It's so true.
And that's what we find a lot. I know Ken would agree with this, is that when we're out doing training or working with companies, and Brandy, you see this in your world as well, common sense and corporations don't go hand in hand.
No. Oh, no.
And so
No.
sometimes in the training and when we're working with them, a lot of what we're talking to them about is just common sense, but getting them to understand it and getting them to understand the benefits of it is the hard part a lot of times.
Yeah. I worked with a company many moons ago that had one of the oddest protocols for engineering that I've ever seen. Every one of their drawings had a table as part of the drawing information, and the table contained 2-digit code for each of their customers. So every customer that got the part that was defined by that drawing in their deliverable, that customer code went on the drawing. And so think about this, and their products are highly complex. They have hundreds of customers. And so every one of their drawings had this table with, 50, 75, 100 2-digit codes representing their customer. Oh, and by the way, kind of like Y2K, when they finally got to the point where they had more than 100 customers, they had to change their code from 2 digits to 3. They had to go change every drawing to re-tab all of those customer designators on all those. Ray, you were talking about how much money did we waste just changing the customer code on the drawings.
Right.
And I told them, I said, that's ridiculous. And they said, well, no, we had to do that because we had to be able to put 3 digits in there. I said, no, changing it from 2 to 3 wasn't ridiculous. Putting the customer designator on the drawing is ridiculous. Think about this. Every time they got a brand new customer, guess what they had to do? First thing they had to do was do an analysis of the configuration that was going to be delivered so they could get a fully exploded bill of material of that configuration, and then go pull all the drawings for all the items in that structure to add a new customer designation. One of the dumbest protocols I have ever seen.
Wow. You guys deal with so many different industries, different type of people, different students, all different levels, and everyone comes to training for a different reason, right? Some are just, I'm just told to come. I have to do this. Some are looking for certain reasons to come and help learn and solve. From your perspectives, what is the most common problem that you see that faces your students and clients?
Oh, for me, that's easy. It's change management. To me, that is the biggest issue. Every company I've ever worked with has issues with their change process. This was a long time ago. I was down in the Johnson Space Center, and I was walking down the hallway with my escort, and this door opens and this guy comes out, and he happens to be the program manager for some major program. I don't remember what it was. I think it had something to do with the space station, but I don't remember for sure. So he knew the guy that I was with, so they started chatting real quick. And then the guy I was with paused and said, well, let me introduce you. This is Ken Black. And he told him who I was and basically what we do. And the first thing out of that guy's mouth was, is he going to help us fix our change process? And this was NASA. Is he going to help us fix our change process? Every organization I've worked with, I can't think of a single one. Ray, maybe you can, but I cannot think of a single company that I've ever worked with that would say, oh, our change process is crackerjack, man. It's a competitive weapon for us.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
Yeah. I had one company once. It was a medical device company. 3 students from that company came to class, and I always, try to first day of class. So why'd you come here? And all 3 of them said, we came because our company sent us because we have problems with our naming and numbering conventions. So that's all we learn about, right? And I was like, okay, well, this is going to be interesting, right? But again, and the other thing, when Ken said, all these probably, yes, over 90%, they come in and they say change management. And what they don't understand when they first start down that journey, good change management process has nothing to do with change management. We don't even get into the details of change management until the second week of our training, because a famous phrase we have is that you cannot accommodate change if what you're trying to change is not properly identified, structured, linked, and owned, which has nothing to do with change management.
Yeah. Yep.
But it has to do with all the linkages and everything else. So it's always interesting, right? And sometimes they'll hear this thing of, well, we heard there's this thing called fast track changes. And we'll go, yes, there is. And they go, we want to do that. And we tell them, maybe someday you may be able to do that. The foundation of things in place, it's not going to happen, because you can try to change things faster, but if you're changing things that are already improper or have errors in them and everything, all you're doing is bad things faster. Right?
Yeah.
Trying to get people to understand that. And usually by the second day of class, they're starting to go, oh, this is a little more complex than I thought it was going to be, but complex in a good way, because what we teach them is the foundational stuff that can help the entire organization, right?
Oh,
it doesn't matter what I'm trying to manage. If what I'm trying to manage doesn't have those things I was talking about, it's going to be difficult to have an efficient change process around it. So that's always the challenge, is getting people past that, especially senior management. Fix the change management process. Well, we got to fix all this stuff down here first. That will get better just by fixing these things. And then we can worry about bringing in the next tool. Then we can worry about fast track changes and all these other things. So,
yeah. I always ask the classes, so how many of you in your career, if you've moved around in different companies, have seen the change process of the organization changed? And everybody's hand goes up. They all go up. And I said, okay, how many of you have seen the change process changed more than one time? And all the hands go up again. They all go. And the reason is, when an organization says we need to fix the change process, they immediately lock in on the change process. But Ray just nailed it. If you want to fix the change process, you got to step away from the change process. You have to go look at all the building blocks that you have to put in place to lay that foundation upon which you can then define a world-class change process. But without those building blocks, you can't do it. You can change the workflow in the change process. You can change who's involved. You can do all the tweaky things within the change process itself. Not going to fix it. You have to get all those building blocks out there. You have to get all the things that enable. I'll give you a great example. One of the key elements of the change process is the enterprise change assessment, the ECA. So many organizations completely skip that step. And they think that it's going to get better. They'll figure all that out downstream after you get the change approved. Well, if you're getting the change approved before you've done the assessment, then nobody knows what they're approving, for one thing. The reason organizations don't do a good ECA is they haven't facilitated their ability to do that, right? And it's all those things that Ray was talking about. You've got to put all the linkages in place, the vertical linkages of items to items, the relationships of items to documents, the ownership linkages from the documents to the owners, the enabling data sets and their owners. You need to get the re-identification tree in place. You need to get the equivalent item and alternate item record in place. There are so many things. In fact, the first 3 courses that we teach in this certification are the building blocks. Then when those are done, now you've got all that data. Now when you go look at the change process, now you can see how it works. I have to tell students all the time, when we finish course 1, people are so pumped up just after course 1. They can't wait to go back and change it. And I have to keep telling them, don't do that. It's too early. I've given you the quiver, but we haven't given you all the arrows that you're going to need to go, fight the battles. So you have to be patient. You have to wait. And, that's hard for some people to do. When they learn this new stuff, they can't wait to get back there and start putting stuff in place, making things happen. And you're better off getting the whole picture before you jump in with both feet. And what's difficult about that? Their leadership. They come back after having a week of training. Their leadership wants to see things happening. And so, what did you learn? Well, I learned about this. Oh, well, we got to go make that happen. Until you see all the pieces and understand how they integrate, you're better off waiting. But if you want a world-class change process, and Ray and I are on 100% agreement on this, you cannot start with the change process. You've got to back away and work on all that other stuff.
There's so many standards here. And when we go to college, for example, there's so many other standards that we learn, right? There's engineering standards, there's manufacturing standards, there's quality standards. There's so many standards out there. Most people that I encounter, they learn change management based on the first job that they've taken. And right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what they learn. And then we all learn based on what goes wrong. So with this being such like the heartbeat of organizations, tell me why you don't think that people are able to do more around this, and that this is always just a common problem.
Well, I think part of it starts off, and this again goes back into our training, when configuration management, CM, is considered to be a sub-process, right? It's a function underneath engineering or a function underneath quality, right? Instead of at a core process level, right? It's difficult to drive the changes that are necessary, right? It's the old fox and the hen house, right? So that's always one of the difficult areas that our students have in overcoming, right? Is being able to go back and make these changes, because some of the changes, right? People are always resistant to change. Nobody likes their cheese moved, right? And so we're going back, and after they've gone through our training and they've come up with a plan in course 6, and they're going back and they're trying to make these changes, well, all of a sudden they need management support. And so part of what has to happen, there needs to be some education, some examples, some understanding that just buying a new tool, a new PLM tool, is not going to fix our problem, right? And so it's cultural change quite often that has to occur, right? Cultural changes in organizations are difficult to implement if senior management isn't supporting them, right? And so understanding that our data is key to the organization. And we've seen it, and both Ken and I have been in the industry for a long time, and even people who have only been in it for 10 years or so, the importance of configuration is bubbling to the top more and more, because as companies strive towards model-based, digital thread, right? All of those things, there's this understanding that, hey, how can I have a digital thread if I don't have those connections? If I don't have those linkages, how do I get those, right? And so they're trying to buy tools, and they're beginning to understand that it's not about the tools, it's about the processes. Well, we have processes, yes, but our processes are not clear, concise, and valid, right? So now all of a sudden we're looking at the business enterprise and identifying, right, which nobody wants to look at, right? I always ask my students, any of you want to go back and work on processes, procedures? And, sometimes one person will raise their hand, right? But most people don't want to do that. But yet that's the foundation of the organization, right? And so getting the company to understand that, hey, processes are key to our success. Documented processes, audits, internal and external, are important for us. We have to have that cultural attitude that says, yes, we want this. We want to get better. We want to have documented processes. We can't just continue to build our products off of our intervention, our firefighters, and because eventually they retire, they leave, they find other jobs, right, and everything else. And then pretty soon we have these huge gaps. And so that's where the culture comes into play. That's where the business processes. And we spend time in every one of our classes circling back always to, yes, my product configuration is important. All my product data is important. But if I don't have that business process side of the house, linked, easy to find, proper ownership, right? The same processes that we use for our product. If that's not in place, I can spin and make things better for the next year or two, but without the process being updated, we'll slide back into chaos.
Yep.
Right? And we see it happen all the time. And we even warn our customers, don't let this happen. You have to get this documented. You have to have these things in place. And they go, yeah. But once we get all these products out the door, then we'll work on that.
I got to pick up on that, because that is such a key thing. When we talk about executive or leadership turnover within an organization, two things are going to happen. You absolutely know two things are going to happen when you have senior leadership turnover. One, there's going to be a reorg. That's just part of the activity that happens when new leadership comes on. And two, there are going to be new directives, new interests, if you will. So I've had students a lot of times tell me, if I work with a company and we do all this training and they're out there doing good stuff, and then I go back 5 years later and I find out all that good stuff that they did has been undone. And they ask me, why does that happen? And I said, well, did you institutionalize the behavior? Because if you didn't, then there's nothing it's like static and dynamic, right? Static is the behaviors that you've institutionalized. Dynamic is the energy to change those behaviors. But once you change them, then you have to turn the dynamic into a static again. So you have to capture it. You have to institutionalize it. You need to get it into the DNA of the organization. And the only way you can do that is to put it into your protocols, put it into your procedures, put it into your policies, put it into your operating standard. You've got to bake it in. Well, guess what? That's not product-related activity. That's all on the business side. And so Ray and I both, when we harp on that, a lot of times you get weird looks. You get people going, what? I thought configuration management was making sure that the engineering is right and that the product met the design. And that's my grandfather's configuration management. The new world of CM has to be inclusive. It has to involve the entire enterprise. The whole ecosystem has to be captured and recognized in the CM process. If you don't, anytime you make progress, as soon as there's leadership turnover, you're going to digress every single time.
Thinking about all of these foundational principles that people need to get in place, that foundation, that solid base that they can really start to see true improvement on. There's a lot that the CM2500 standard encompasses. And so what do you think is the most difficult standard to tackle and why?
Interesting you brought that up, where we have this CM2 Congress in place, and there's a sub-team on that I happen to be on, and we're looking at this standard right now and did a survey out. And what we found was that what people are struggling the most with is the baselines outside of engineering. So my administrative baseline, my facility baseline, my IT baseline, my service baselines, struggling with that tremendously. And then I would also say probably struggling with getting good configuration management into the development process, right? So we've got this whole thing. Yes, I'm getting ready to go to production. I got to get everything all nicely packaged and everything else. But in early development, getting configuration management involved there to capture those early requirements and to be able to do it efficiently, right? There's resistance because, some of it's historical that, development engineering doesn't want anybody slowing them down and all these old concepts and everything else. And then the baseline part of it is just people just don't have that understanding, right? And even with the world of moving towards this digital thread, you can't have a digital thread if you don't have a baseline of your information in your factory and in your service organization, because that's the history of your product, right? But they struggle with it. And not that the work doesn't get done, right? Because, in our factories, we get product out the door. In service, they get the maintenance activities done, they get the replacement parts done, but they get it done through intervention, right?
Yep.
Firefighting, intervention resources, expediting, all these things that happen, right? And so trying to get the CM people that are coming through our training to understand that, yes, when you go back, you came here with the vision of your little world. We just took your world and expanded it to the entire life cycle of the product from birth to grave.
And every segment of the business.
Yeah. And some students struggle with that, right? Because they've got their little world that they were comfortable with. And we're saying that little world doesn't exist anymore. It's got to be the whole thing. And so I would say that that's probably the development and the baselines are the two that I see are the biggest issues right now.
Yeah, and the baseline ties right into one of the other ones for me, and I mentioned it earlier, and it's that enterprise change assessment. That is so crucial for successful management processing of change. And the baseline is a big element, because when you're trying to do an assessment and evaluation of a change impact, that baseline provides you so much visibility, because you can see, oh, here's the document that's change is being requested against. And so let me go look. So that document in the baseline, I can see, oh, that document is linked to that item, and that item is linked to that item, and that item has this tool. And through the baseline, you can get a lot of the activity associated with an ECA. You can get the roadmap because it has all the linkages. If you don't have that baseline, if you don't have the visibility of linkages, how do you do an assessment? How do you do an evaluation of the potential impact of a change? I have never once seen a formal transformation plan that showed the planned activities and the schedules for how we're going to move the organization from today's way to tomorrow's. I've never seen that.
So since we're speaking about the CM2 500 standard, let's talk a little bit about what do you think makes the most impact for a company in terms of quality improvements? Is there anything in there from your experience that is really just that really big step change that people are looking for?
I'll take that one, because what Ken has mentioned a couple of times, the ECA. If companies would just stop and understand that if we do a proper change assessment on a change, it's going to allow us to make a better business decision, and it's going to allow us to come up with a successful implementation plan for that change.
Yep.
Change is approved. That's a big deal. And as Ken mentioned earlier, too many companies, they either email everybody, they talk to a few folks, or the program or project manager gets with the engineering manager and they put together some things and that's it. And then pretty soon the factory, all of a sudden, when a change is thrown over the wall to them, and here we are in 2024, and we're still seeing it happen. The factory goes, I don't have the resources or the money to implement that change. Yep. I can't do that, right? Or service goes, well, hey, what about us? How are we supposed to get those kits, and when are we going to have them, and who's going to be notifying the customers that we have to do these changes and stuff like that? So, and all of that would be fixed if we truly had a cross-functional change assessment in place at the very beginning of the change process.
Yep. I've only seen it twice where a company actually has designated representatives for the ECA. One company that I worked with, and this was, oh my gosh, I don't know if the company is still around. It's been so long, but that company actually had formal job titles of change board representative. That was a formal position within the company, and every department, every segment, so finance had one, HR had one, manufacturing had one, engineering had one, every discipline in the business had an assigned change board representative. So when the change request would come in and it was time to do an evaluation or an assessment, their change manager, which would be equivalent to our change leader, knew exactly what to do. He simply distributed that to all of the designated representatives. They were the ones who did the ECA. They were also the ones then, if the change was approved, they would attend the CIB to commit the resources. I've only seen that twice, and that is the slickest change process. I mean, that just augments the CM2 change process. If you can have that kind of assignments of individuals to take those roles to accomplish those actions and activities in the workflow, wow, it was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But your question was about what do I think would be a good one to increase the overall quality within the organization. I love our principle of document ownership. So creators and users, if we had assigned creators and users, now think about this. In CM2, we're not saying assign creators and users to engineering. We're saying assign creators and users to every data set in the company. Let me tell you something. If Ray and I worked for an organization and I was assigned as the document creator and Ray was assigned as the designated user, trust me, when we would release that data set, it would be the best data set it could possibly be. There's no doubt about it. Why do I say that? Because Ray's smart. Yeah, because we're owned. We own it. One of the things that drives me nuts in today's business world is the lack of individual accountability. I don't see that anymore. I don't see that pride of ownership. And when we talk about creators and users, you can't just say, okay, Ken, you're the creator, Ray, you're the user, and then walk away. There has to be some story behind it. There has to be an explanation of why those two titles of creator and designated user are so significant. What does it mean to the business? What's the process expectation of those roles of creator and designated user? And then we tell them, and look, as the owners, you are the ones who will decide when a data set is ready for release, nobody else. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey guys, we have to get that out today. It's got to go out today, no matter what. And we know that we're 3 days away. It's not going out because I'm not putting my name on it if I don't believe it's the best it can be. And I have known Ray for a long time. He's not going to put his name on it until he believes this is the best it could possibly be. That, to me, is the power of the creator and user roles.
Yeah, very powerful. But yet, for some reason, 99% of the companies I've worked with and the students I work with seen that this concept of creating, we can't do that. It's too hard to do, too complex. And even after we sit down with them and explain how you can have metadata for the documents and the data in your system, how it's easy to make those changes, the control, how important it is. The percent of companies who have done that is still relatively small because the perception of difficulty and, to Ken's point, the worry that, oh gosh, I'm going to be held accountable. I don't want that, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about the whole creator user concept and can I have multiple users? And of course I can if I have multiple factories. And the process is flexible, but the power of having that. And earlier I had mentioned how people sometimes come in and want to learn about the fast track change process. And at this point, if you want a fast track change process, you have to have creator and users in place.
That's right.
We can't have it.
Yeah.
Right? And so that one concept, I would say ECAs, as I mentioned earlier, the change assessment, but to do a proper change assessment, you need creators and users. Who owns it? Who's responsible for that?
And when you're asking about quality across the organization, the assignment of creator and user is not limited to product related stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell my classes when we start talking about ownership and data, and I tell them, everybody in every company in the world is either creating, changing, or using information and data. Everybody in your company, it doesn't matter, the CEO down to the maintenance person who has to do some work. It's all based off of data. And so we need to understand that all of that data is important to the company, right? If I can't have the proper maintenance done on something, then I can't get certain work done. If the CEO doesn't get the right data, he's making decisions based off of bad data. There was a headline today when I was walking through the grocery store on the Denver Post, and it said, Denver city government frozen, auditor finds, bad data, bad processes. And I was like, I stopped and looked at it and I go, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Here. And it's for 2024. And here's a headline saying that a government is having issues getting things done because of bad data and bad processes. And that, how do you start fixing that? All the things we've talked about, the linkages, but the proper ownership. Who owns that data? And I guarantee you, in that issue today that's going on in the city and county of Denver, if they go down and try to find out, well, how this happened, everybody's going to go, it wasn't me. Wasn't me. Wasn't my department. No, there's no ownership, right? And to the comment Ken made earlier, the lack of accountability. And accountability is not a bad word.
No.
I have a job. I get a salary. I'm paid. I have pride in my work. That's accountability, right? And so we need more of that in today's world.
I agree.
It goes all back to what we said at the beginning, right? Is common sense and good sense. And that's the part that's there's so much good low-hanging fruit, but it's also can be very frustrating for people who can't do some of these things, right? And I think these two right here, the creator and user concept, accountability, all leaders, everyone agrees. Nobody disagrees about accountability and the benefits it brings. And the same thing on the ECA. It's good planning, right? Like it's good project management principles. Like why would we not scope it? All changes are small projects. Why would we not scope a small change before you go and do the tasks?
Well, think about that. If you don't scope the change and identify all the impacts, then how do you create the plan on how you're going to go implement?
Not very well.
No.
Don't worry, guys. We can change that wheel on a bicycle while we're going downhill 60 miles an hour, no problem.
That's right. That's right.
That's the attitude in these companies, right? Everything you just said, Brittany, right, was common sense.
Yeah.
But when you try to explain that into organizations, they just look at you like going, "Oh no, that'll slow us down."
That's right.
Yes. Oh yeah.
We'd rather do that change 3 or 4 times.
We want to be agile. Do we want to be agile?
Yeah.
So, by the way, who wants to volunteer to get on that bike and start riding it downhill? So, yeah. And unfortunately, until we can demonstrate that all these things that we've been talking about will gain efficiencies, will reduce the cost to the company of processing changes, which is a benefit, right? Companies have to understand that. But when they don't capture that cost, when they don't have those processes in place, they're just used to doing the firefighting. And what happens with firefighting, soon that becomes the normal process and we just get used to it.
Yeah.
And we're used to it. And somebody comes in and says, there's a better way. Oh, we don't need a better way. We're okay because you know what? We made a profit last quarter.
And we know how to fight fires.
Yeah. Could we have made more money? Yeah, you don't understand our industry. Right?
Yeah. Heard all those stories, heard all those reasons, heard all those excuses many times. I got to just a real short one. I was invited to do an executive awareness presentation to a company that was not a client of ours at the time. So this was the opportunity to crack that shell and get in there. So I've got the CEO of the company and 10 of his direct reports. So this is the entire C-suite team. And I'm doing my thing. And probably 20 minutes into my presentation, that CEO stands up and says, "Hold on a minute, please." And then he looks around the room and he says, "Let me see a show of hands. How many of you don't understand what configuration management is? Let me see your hands." Now, how many hands are going to go up, right? Here's the CEO saying, "Show me your hand if you don't understand." So nobody's hands went up. And he said, "That's what I thought. We understand this. Thank you very much, Ken. Thanks for coming in." That was it. Packed up my stuff, out the door. And from the time I walked in till the time I walked out was like 30 minutes. And that company, oh man, talk about a company that needs help. If you can't get somebody's attention, if you can't get somebody to not only understand, here's the hard part. This is the difficult part. And this is one of the coaching tips that I always tell my students. When you're making your pitch to your senior leadership, you have to avoid certain words and employ certain words, right? So when you're talking to your leadership, you don't talk to them about how big the problem is, right? Because if you tell them how big the problem is and you show them that they're spending 60% of the resources on corrective action, you're literally telling the executives you're not doing a very good job. So there's a better way, right? There's a better way. So what we do instead is we tell the students, look, when you go talk to your leadership, talk about a potential, talk about an opportunity. And the way you get your foot in the door is don't go in there asking them to let you go change anything. Just go to them and talk about the things that you've learned in your CM2 training. Talk to them about the fact that we know we have process gaps, like Ray was talking about. We have process gaps. Now, we don't know what the implication or the ramification of all those gaps are, but we would certainly like to go find out. So I'm not asking you to authorize me to go make any changes. I'm asking you, allow me to put a team together to do an assessment. We need to find out how big the opportunity is. But that's kind of a key thing when you're trying to pitch to senior leaders. You got to turn it in such a way that it sounds good. And that way, when you come back to them with the results of the assessment and they say, oh, we need to go do this, then all of a sudden they own it. It's their idea to go make the change. You're just giving them the ammunition to make the decisions. I like that approach.
I like that approach a lot.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Good to
Thanks,
see
Brandon.
you.
Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe and review the show. And for more information on IPX, visit ipxhq.com.